Good evening and welcome to Reading Grounds. That was tonight's new song. It was a little thing called The Cave Resides Deep in the Forest by Artificial Music. I get all my music from Audio Library, a YouTube channel, Audio Library Music for Content Creators. More information is available in the description. It is royalty-free music. I try to do a new song every month, and I also have a playlist full of songs that I've used in the past, which can be found on this channel if you're at all interested or curious. The song was a little livelier than I expected, but, well, it's pretty good. Anyways, welcome to Reading Grounds. Tonight it is the 5th of May, 2019. I almost said 2014, but it hasn't been that for half a decade now, so that would be incorrect. Start by looking at Wikipedia's front page for tonight. Today's featured article is Bobby Gibbs, who a Australian fighter ace of World War II and the longest-serving wartime commander of the No. 3 Squadron RAAF. He was officially credited with 10 and a quarter aerial victories. That's interesting. I didn't know you could get a quarter of a victory. Although his score is often reported as 12, including 2 shared. He commanded No. 3 Squadron in North Africa during 1942 and 43, a jackaroo and salesman before joining the Royal Australian Air Force in 1940. Gibbs flew with No. 3 Squadron in the Middle East and became commanding officer during the Western Desert Campaign. His leadership and fighting skills earned him the Distinguished Service Order and the Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar. In the news recently, in horse racing, Country Horse wins the Kentucky Derby after maximum security. Country House wins the Kentucky Derby after maximum security, which crossed the line first, but was disqualified for interference. Country House is an interesting name for a horse. Cyclone Fani has hit India and Bangladesh, killing at least 50 people. In Japan, Emperor Akihito has abdicated and is succeeded by his son Naruhito, marking the beginning of the Reiwa era. Scientists announced that the Zaihe mandible from Baishia Karst cave belonged to the first known Denisovan outside Serbia and the earliest human known to have lived on the high-altitude Tibetan plateau. Tomorrow is May 6th, which is the beginning of Ramadan, which is the Muslim period of fasting. It is a 9-month fast, apparently, I believe, from sunrise to sunset. On May 6th, in history, the army of Inca Emperor Manco Inca Yupanqui began a 10-month siege of Cusco against the garrison of Spanish conquistadors and Italian auxiliaries led by Hernando Pizarro. That was in 1536. It looks like Tyler's on the stream. Hello, Tyler. Welcome to the stream. Hopefully some of the others regulars show up. If not, that's okay. Because I'm here, and that's all that matters. I'm just kidding. Actually, Tyler matters. Thanks for joining us, Tyler. Sometimes I just speak and I don't realize what I'm saying. But anyways, on May 6th in 1801, during the French Revolutionary Wars, the outmanned and outgunned HMS Speedy captured the 32-gun Spanish frigate El Gamo. El Gamo? I would assume that's what that means. In 1954, at Oxford's Iffley Road Track, English runner Roger Bannister became the first person to run the mile in under 4 minutes. In 1991, Time magazine published an article highly critical of Scientology called The Thriving Cult of Greed and Power, which led to years of legal conflict. As far as in on the Did You Know sub-article, it says, did you know that Monteverde, Verdi, I believe, set the beginning of Psalm 70, traditionally opening Vespers in his Vespero della Beate Vergine, as a brilliant call to attention. I don't know what any of those words mean. Well, today is May 5th. That's Cinco de Mayo. And I don't really know what Cinco de Mayo is, so I thought that I might start off this stream by reading and trying to find out a little bit of what Cinco de Mayo is. Last time on the stream, we read a short story called The Most Dangerous Game, which is a famous and influential short story. But we also began reading our first book. That is to say, we've made our first attempt to read a book from cover to cover on the stream, which we've never done before. We'll be continuing that, hopefully, later on in the stream after the break. Should be in about 45 minutes or so. In the meantime, however, I'd like to take a look at the Cinco de Mayo Wikipedia page. And Cinco de Mayo, of course, is Spanish, literally meaning cinco, which is 5, and de Mayo, which is of May. So literally 5th of May. According to the Wikipedia article, it is an annual celebration held on May 5th. The date is observed to commemorate the Mexican Army's victory over the French Empire at the Battle of Puebla on May 5th, 1862, under the leadership of General Ignacio Zaragoza. The victory of the smaller Mexican force against a larger French force was a boost to morale for the Mexicans. A year after the battle, a larger French force defeated Zaragoza at the Second Battle of Puebla, and Mexico City soon fell to the invaders. Interesting. In the United States, Cinco de Mayo has taken on a significance beyond that in Mexico. In fact, it is more popularly celebrated in the United States than in Mexico, which is interesting. The date has become associated with the celebration of Mexican American culture. These celebrations began in California, where they have been observed annually since 1863. The day gained nationwide popularity in the 1980s, thanks especially to advertising campaigns by beer and wine companies. Today, Cinco de Mayo generates beer sales on par with the Super Bowl. Wow. There's a little a painting here on the Wikipedia page for Cinco de Mayo. This looks rather interesting, so I think I will actually post this on stream. It's part of the chat window. Whenever I think of Cinco de Mayo, I think of the word Cinco, which I associate mostly with Tim and Eric Awesome Show. They have their the show had a parody corporation, which was a reoccurring gag in the series. A company called Cinco, whose outlandish products were often impractical or just plain gross. So that's what I associate everything with. But this is a battle of Batalla de Puebla, which is the name, which is where the holiday of Cinco de Mayo gets its significance from. It's a beautiful little painting. I don't know much about art, unfortunately, but I love the color of this one. Anyways, moving back onto the Cinco de Mayo Wikipedia page. In Mexico, the commemoration of the battle continues to be mostly ceremonial, though, such as through military parades or battle reenactments. The city of Puebla marks the event with an arts festival, a festival of local cuisine, and reenactments of the battle. Cinco de Mayo is sometimes mistaken for Mexico's Independence Day, the most important national holiday in Mexico, which is celebrated on September 16th, commemorating the Cry de Dolores, which initiated the War of Mexican Independence from Spain. It is really interesting that you can have a holiday which means more in a different country than in the country that was intended to celebrate it. Um, I've heard, I haven't heard any specific examples of that aside from maybe something like Christmas, which, isn't an American holiday, but was made a big deal by uh, Americans, particularly because of marketing and, of course, Christian values. But I do remember hearing that in the Japanese religion of Shinto, which believes that a particularly noble person, a person of great worth or accomplishments, a genius, if you will, um, when they die, they can ascend and become deities in a sense. I don't know exactly the implication for that or what it takes, but I remember hearing that George Washington, the founding father, is actually considered a deity in Shintoism. I don't know why exactly, but apparently the Japanese love him just as much or more than we do. Tyler is saying that Black Friday is a big deal in Europe now. That makes sense to me. I suppose people do love spending money, or at least being told to spend money. It's really quite amazing how much marketing and profitability affects our culture. Anyways, going back to the Cinco de Mayo Wikipedia page, Cinco de Mayo has its roots in the Second French Intervention in Mexico, which took place in the aftermath of the 1846-48 Mexican-American War and the 1858 to 1861 Reform War. The Reform War was a civil war that pitted liberals who believed in separation of church and state and freedom of religion against conservatives who favored a tight bond between the Catholic Church and the Mexican state. These wars nearly bankrupted the Mexican treasury. On July 17, 1861, Mexican President Benito Juarez issued a issued a moratorium in which all foreign debt payments would be suspended for 2 years. In response, Britain, France, and Spain sent naval forces to Veracruz to demand reimbursement. Britain and Spain negotiated with Mexico and withdrew, but France, at the time ruled by Napoleon III, decided to use the opportunity to establish an empire in Mexico that would favor French interests, the Second Mexican Empire. The empire was part of an envisioned Latin America, which was a term used to imply cultural kinship of the region with France, that would rebuild French influence in the American continent and exclude Anglophone American territories. Late in 1861, a well-armed French fleet attacked Veracruz, landing a large French force and driving President Juarez and his government into retreat. Moving on from Veracruz towards Mexico City, the French army encountered heavy resistance from the Mexicans close to Puebla, at the Mexican forts of Laredo and Guadalupe. The French army of 8,000 attacked the poorly equipped Mexican army of 4,000. On May 5, 1862, the Mexicans decisively defeated the French army. The victory represented a significant morale boost to the Mexican army and the Mexican people at large, and helped establish a sense of national unity and patriotism. The Mexican victory, however, was short-lived. A year later, with 30,000 troops, the French were able to defeat the Mexican army, capture Mexico City, and install Emperor Maximilian I as ruler of Mexico. The French victory was itself short-lived, lasting only 3 years, from 1864 to 1867. By 1865, with the American Civil War now over, the United States began to provide more political and military assistance to Mexico to expel the French. Upon the conclusion of the American Civil War, Napoleon III, facing a persistent Mexican guerrilla resistance, the threat of Prussia, and the prospect of a serious scrap with the United States, retreated from Mexico starting in 1866. The Mexicans recaptured Mexico City, and Maximilian I was apprehended and executed, along with his Mexican generals Miguel Miramon and Tomas Mejia Camacho in Cerro de la Campanas, Querétaro. My Spanish is lacking, so I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing those right. But on June 5th, 1867, Benito Juarez finally entered Mexico City, where he installed a new government and reorganized his administration. The Battle of Puebla was significant both nationally and internationally for several reasons. First, although considerably outnumbered, the Mexicans defeated a better equipped French army. This battle was significant in that the 4,000 Mexican soldiers were greatly outnumbered by the well equipped French army of 8,000 that had not been defeated for almost 50 years. Second, since the Battle of Puebla, some have argued that no country in the Americas has subsequently been invaded by any other military force. Historian Justo Sierra, and perhaps to be Justo, anyways, has written in his Political Evolution of the Mexican People that had Mexico not defeated the French in Puebla on May 5th, 1862, France would have gone to the aid of the Confederacy in the United States Civil War, and the United States' destiny would have been different. That's interesting. Who knows if that's actually true, but because it's certainly hard to see it, at least from where I stand. But anyways, no point scrutinizing it since I know very little about it. Anyways, okay, history of the holiday in the United States. According to a paper published by the UCLA Study for the Center of Latino Health and Culture about the origin of the observance of Cinco de Mayo in the United States, the modern American focus on that day first started in California in 1863 in response to the resistance to French rule in Mexico. Far up in the gold country town of Columbia, now Columbia State Park, Mexican miners were so overjoyed at the news that they spontaneously fired off rifle shots and fireworks, sang patriotic songs, and made impromptu speeches. A 2007 UCLA Newsroom article notes that the holiday, which has been celebrated in California continuously since 1863, is virtually ignored in Mexico. Interesting. Time magazine reports that Cinco de Mayo started to come into vogue in 1940s America during the rise of the Chicano movement. The holiday crossed over from California into the rest of the United States in the 1950s and 1960s, but did not gain popularity until the 80s when marketers, especially beer companies, capitalized on the celebratory nature of the day and began to promote it. It grew in popularity and evolved into a celebration of Mexican culture and heritage, first in areas with large Mexican American populations, followed by, other cities. There's a whole list of them here, but there's no point in listing all of them, right? In a 1998 study in the Journal of American Culture, it was reported that there were more than 120 official U.S. celebrations of Cinco de Mayo in 21 different states. An update in 2006 found that the number of official Cinco de Mayo events was 150 or more, according to Jose Alamillo, a professor of ethnic studies at Washington State University in Pullman, who has studied the cultural impact of Cinco de Mayo north of the border. Los Angeles' Fiesta Broadway has been billed as the largest Cinco de Mayo celebration in the world, which it most certainly was at its peak in the 1990s when it attracted crowds of 500,000 or more. In recent years, the attendance has seen a dramatic decrease. Oh, thanks, Trump. On June 7, 2005, the United States Congress issued a concurrent resolution calling on the President of the United States to issue a proclamation calling upon the people of the United States to observe Cinco de Mayo with appropriate ceremonies and activities. To celebrate, many display Cinco de Mayo banners, while school districts hold special events to educate students about its historical significance. Special events and celebrations highlight Mexican culture, especially in its music and regional dancing. According to Nielsen, in 2013, more than $600 million worth of beer was purchased in the United States for Cinco de Mayo, more than for the Super Bowl or St. Patrick's Day. Wow, that's a lot. As for Mexico itself, on May 9th, 1862, President Juarez declared that the anniversary of the Battle of Puebla would be a national holiday regarded as Battle of Puebla Day, or Battle of Cinco de Mayo. Today, the commemoration of the battle is not observed as a national holiday in Mexico. However, all public schools are closed nationwide on May 5th in Mexico. The day is an official holiday in the state of Puebla, where the battle took place, and also a full holiday in the neighboring state of Veracruz. In Puebla, historical reenactments, parades, and meals take place to commemorate the battle. Parade participants dress as French and Mexican soldiers to reenact the battle. Every year, the city also hosts the Festival International de Puebla, which gathers national and international artists, traditional musicians, and dancers, as well as the Festival International de Mole, with an emphasis on the city's iconic mole poblano. In Mexico City, military commemoration is occasionally held at Campo Marte. A street in the historic center of Mexico City was named after the battle in 1862 by Benito Juarez. Hmm. Apparently, according to this, there are some other celebrations outside of Mexico and the United States. Uh, apparently, in Canada, some pubs celebrate it. In the Cayman Islands, there's a bit of a celebration. Wow. Apparently, the city of Brisbane, Queensland, Australia holds an annual Mexican festival to honor the day. Celebrations are held in London and New Zealand. Interesting. So that's the article on Cinco de Mayo. Uh, it is really interesting to see how culture can sort of take you by surprise. Not only is it not about actual Mexican independence, but it's also more celebrated by the United States than it is by Mexico itself herself. Very interesting. Well, tonight I was thinking I because Kimry, who comes on the stream, had asked me to. Well, she didn't ask, but it had come up that she kind of missed the fairy tales and that she had wanted me to read some of them again. However, neither her nor Shelby are on the stream tonight, so I don't know if I want to do that. Not that there's anything wrong with fairy tales, of course, but well, the idea is to go onward and upward, at least as much as possible. But of course, the funny thing about that is that now I don't know exactly where I'm going to go. Uh, I do have a small list of things that I had considered maybe reading on stream. Right now, though, I don't have anything in particular. Tyler says he's down for whatever, which is nice. Hmm. It's sort of a strange balance because I'm a very dark person sometimes, and especially when it comes to things that I find interesting. Um, but I have to admit that some things I don't necessarily want to read or share on here just because I don't want this stream to be so alienating. Hmm. I suppose I could. I was thinking sometimes I contact Shelby and ask, see if she just as like a reminder for the stream. Even though her and Kimry are basically the only reason why this is kept going, because uh, they like it enough to encourage me to do it. I'm kind of feeling lazy tonight though, so I don't know if I necessarily want to contact them. Although I suppose it is, I don't know what time it goes on, but I know that Game of Thrones has been going on recently, and I don't, obviously, I can't really compete with that. Anybody that wants to watch that, which is a lot of people that are watching it now. I've been trying to avoid spoilers on that, but that's been more, that's been more difficult than I had anticipated. Nothing especially major has been spoiled for me, but little things. I suppose it's only inevitable. You'd have to go completely dark, and even then, uh, even if you were to shut yourself off from all social media, somebody would probably send you a raven that just says like "Area dies" or something. I don't know if that actually happens. I don't know if that's a spoiler, so don't get mad at me. Tyler says the season's been pretty meh. Um, I could believe that. Apparently, ever since they've diverged from the books, uh, apparently it hasn't been quite as good. The stuff that was covering material that was already in the books, apparently that was really good. And then ever since they got ahead of George R. R. Martin, apparently, from what I've heard, it hasn't been as good, which is quite the shame. I do have a copy of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is three short stories, two or three short stories George R. R. Martin wrote that take place in Westeros. they're uh, they're really good stories about Dunk and Egg. The characters are called. Um, Whereas A Song of Ice and Fire is very much, kind of edgy and trying to, uh, well, it's edgy. It's trying to head you off. In comparison, these stories, Dunk and Egg, Night of the Seven Kingdoms, um, it's still got that Westeros realism to it, but it's a lot more adventurous. It gives it a very classic feel. It's a really good reading. Um, I wouldn't mind reading it. I don't know. I think they are kind of longer for short stories, and of course they are. It is a book, not simply a public domain short story like you might find in a textbook or something. So I don't know if I would feel good about. Um, I don't know if I would feel comfortable reading it on stream. There, really, there is not a lot that I feel comfortable about reading on stream, which is unfortunate. Because you want to appear professional and you want to be as uh, inclusive as possible. Which, to be honest, like as far as my writing goes, that's very antithetical to what I believe as a writer. I don't necessarily believe. Obviously, you can be as inclusive as possible if you'd like, but I don't. There's this stigma, this belief these days, not necessarily widespread, but certainly well known, that authors should be as inclusive as possible, and not just authors, but movies and TVs and video games. They need to be as diverse as possible and as accessible as possible. And I don't buy that for a second. It's unfortunate that there isn't necessarily more inclusion, but I don't believe that your story should have to worry about inclusion. And being accepted by people. Certainly, I've been working on a book for a while now. It's not something I would call particularly diverse or inclusive. Um, Not because I don't want to be inclusive necessarily, but just because that's not what I'm trying to do, if that makes sense. Like, that's not my priority. I'm not sitting there thinking, how could I fit, a disabled black woman into this book and check off all my token minority cards all at once. Because I'm not going to include a character who's black or crippled or a woman or whatever unless there's something in the story that makes sense for them and makes them more compelling beyond just the fact that that's who they are. I'm not necessarily opposed to those things, but as far as my writings go, I don't want to do that unless I feel like I have a good reason. Unless I feel like there's a specific reason, I should say. And I don't believe in filling diversity quotas or anything like that. That having been said, a stream is a little bit different because people don't necessarily pay for this. If I were to do something like this and if I wanted it to reach as broad of an audience as possible, um, then I don't necessarily want to lock people out of that. Although at the same time, it's it is my stream, but mm, as I think about it, I suppose it doesn't necessarily make sense because it is supposed to be sort of a personal thing, something that I do. And I started it for my own personal reasons. I've ranted about this before, that I originally just wanted basically bedtime stories, and I just put people to sleep, and that was it. Which, might still happen in the future. I don't know. That that's an appealing idea, but my friends who aren't on the stream currently, they kind of they were really pushing for me to do something a little more like we've been doing, which is almost more like a blog or just general reading of various things, rather than specifically trying to bore people to death. They want something that's entertaining, that kind of keeps them awake. And so, they're my friends. They're very supportive, and I felt like I should oblige them, considering they take up more than 50% of my audience. Um, but at the same time, uh, it does purport this interesting little. mm, I don't know if you call it a catch-22, but it is a sort of a strange situation where, like, um, I don't know. I guess perhaps I haven't thought about it as much as I'd like to believe I thought about it. But essentially, what I wanted to do is now different from what I'm doing. Oh, I just got a text from Shelby actually, and she says that she's unable to make it tonight, which is unfortunate. Not sure about Kimry. I don't know if she'll be on, but what can you do? It's sort of this. It's sort of like selling out, I suppose. Except the difference is that I'm not making money. I'm just trying to please my friends because that's the people that come on the stream. And that might, honestly, that might always be what it is. Because I would still like for this stream to be just a boring put you to sleep stream. And what I would really like to do, given the chance, is to do just a straight up reading, um, to read a story or whatever. And then when the stream is over or whatever, or perhaps I could even do it currently, given that there's a create highlight button on the stream panel for YouTube, um, to just separate those videos and post them on YouTube. And then if anyone was like, oh, I'm browsing late night YouTube, I'm looking for some white noise, something to put me to sleep, and then they find the channel and they're like, oh, this is nice. This guy's just reading and he's not making crude jokes about wieners or being homophobic or whatever. He's just telling pleasant little public domain stories. And that's nice, and I'm going to listen to this. And I'm perfectly okay with that, even if I never make any money off of that. That's kind of like what I want. Um, but with my two friends being so vocal and being persistent and insistent, they've been wanting me to do something a little more entertaining, you know. Also, part of the stream is that, like, as an aspiring author and uh, other things, I've been thinking that it might be. I feel like I have a good enough voice that I could perhaps do um, a little bit of voice acting. Not necessarily, well, I hesitate to say acting because I don't consider myself an actor, not in spirit or practice, but to do voice work, I suppose would be better. Um, and I think I could, I think I could do okay with that. And just do, like cheap little jobs on the side, maybe help supplement my income. Somebody could contact me and be like, "Hey, do you want to, read this thing for me?" And I'll be like, "Sure, I'll do that." Attention, all Fortnite gamers, I need your credit card or whatever. In order to do that, though, I don't feel comfortable trying to do something like that with my current setup. I would want a more professional microphone, and then I would want to, have, an actual sound studio. If not, I mean, obviously, like it doesn't have to be an actual studio. I've talked to a few um, lesser known, I guess, or small time or self-published indie authors, whatever you want to call them, who have done their voice work, reading their audiobooks. And they have said that one lady said that she had woken up at 2 in the morning because that was the only time the house and the neighborhood were all quiet. And so that was what she did. She would just get up at 2 in the morning and do her readings. And then another one said that she would just like basically close herself off in her closet and then uh, she would sit in there and read. And I've been wondering about that because, if I'm going to do professional voice work, even if it's, you know, just small bit parts, obviously, like if I'm going to put myself out there and do recordings, I'm going to have to do, you know, those recordings on my own and not necessarily go to the studio. Tyler's just telling me to put some foam on the walls of a closet, and that's pretty good. I do have a fairly large closet, not quite walk-in, but certainly wide enough for my fat butt. I'd have to clean it out a little bit, and I could close it and figure things out. I am also next door to the furnace room, which is surprisingly quiet. I had thought about maybe even trying to do recording in there, or I could even just put some foam on in my bedroom and do it there. That would probably be pretty cheap. But in any case, I would want to have a professional microphone ahead of time, which I've talked about a little bit on stream. Um, and in fact, I'm sure I've referenced it before, but the YouTuber Lord Mandalore posted a video that talked a little bit about um, how he does his recordings, and he had recommendations for foam and for microphone. That video, along with some other good videos, is on a playlist also available on my channel. But that was something I was thinking of doing. School is out now. I'm done with my finals. I've been thinking about that it would be nice to go and actually get a microphone because now I haven't changed my work schedule. I'm still only working 2 days a week, um, which is a complete nightmare. The goal right now, I have about a month before my summer class starts, and then once that starts, I only have class once a week, 1 day a week, and it's an English class, so it should be pretty easy. But I was thinking that in the meantime, I'm gonna start looking for another job. Tomorrow, I'm gonna be updating my resume, and then I'm going to start looking, figure things out, because I need to get out of the kitchen job and find something else. Uh, Excuse me. But I've been thinking a lot about writing lately, of course. The League of Utah Writers had their spring conference, not last week, but the week prior on Saturday. Took the day off work, and I was pretty excited. I was thinking it was going to be kind of like that it was going to be a lot of fun. It was enjoyable. I learned a lot, but it was very exhausting, like a lot more than I thought. It was like 7, 8 hours of just straight up lectures, basically. All these panels that independent authors were giving. I learned a lot of useful stuff because I basically just went to marketing stuff. Because as I've thought about it, as a writer, for me, the hardest thing, or I should say, the easiest part about writing is the actual writing itself, which is saying a lot because there's a lot of work going on there. And is Tyler's asking me if the league is full of elitists. Actually, I don't feel like the Utah League is, which it's kind of surprising. I showed up for the introduction, where they kind of talked about the conference and all that. And the guy giving the speech, I think he was either the president or the president elect. He made mention. He says we're not nearly as exclusive as a lot of League of Writers are. He's like, and people notice that and people appreciate that. And there were a lot of people that cheered when he said that. So thankfully, it's a very supportive scene. Although I'm a little reluctant just because because I've mentioned before that my writing is kind of dark and the things that I reflect on are very dark. And I've been wondering about all that. Um, that's what I've been looking over though. Because Shelby and Kimmery have suggested, as far as writing goes, to self-publish and then use that as leverage to get into an actual publishing company. And to be honest, like as I was looking into it, I was like, well, if I'm learning all this marketing stuff anyway, maybe I should just start like an indie publishing company. And that's way down the line, but for some reason that idea doesn't scare me off. And maybe that's just because I'm naive and I have no idea how hard it's going to be. And the funny thing is, like, I don't like marketing, but I feel like I know kind of what I should be doing. Like, I feel like I would be good at it. I don't know. I could be completely wrong, but I've been thinking about it. I'm really tempted to start a small publishing company and to just do like, because I mentioned on one of the streams, um, I mentioned that interview that I did with a publisher and an editor, and he has his own indie publishing thing. And basically, what they do, it's called Edit Right. It's basically like a full scale publisher, but instead of taking a cut, they just charge you a flat rate, and then it changes. So he'll be like, oh, you need marketing, you need this or that, and, so that'll cost this much and that much. And I thought that might be an interesting idea to be able to just do something like that and to just help out small time writers and help them get their footing. And who knows, maybe I'd be good enough at it that I could make, a lot of money on it. I'm not saying I would, but it's certainly an idea because as much as I love writing, I'm not so sure how consistent my writing will be. Because I have this book, and I've met a lot of genre fiction writers who are like, yeah, this is the first book in eight, or this is the first of a trilogy. And I'm like, how? What? Like, you haven't even finished the second book. How do you know it's a trilogy? How do you know there's eight books? Like, how do you do that? I met one author. I can't even remember his name, unfortunately, but he told me about his book at the convention, not the League of Utah Writers, at Comic Con, and he told me about it, and he was like, so this is the first book in the series, but I call it book four because it's actually like it takes place after this event, and book two is actually going to take place before this one, and like it was just this like weird, complicated timeline. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, how do you plan this out? Because I'm like, I don't know if it says more about me or about them, but I cannot plan out like more than one book in my head. At least not like currently. Maybe I'm just inexperienced, but the book I'm currently writing, I'm not like, oh, this is gonna be the first of a quadrilogy, and there's gonna be like 8 books and 6 spin-offs and 12 fan fiction, and I'm gonna draw all this stuff. I was just like, okay, I have one story to tell, and I'm gonna do it, and it's just gonna take one book because that's what a book is for. And like I've been toying with the idea of a sequel, and so I just look at all that, and I'm like, how do you write a book and then already know where it's going to go? How do you write like that big epic trilogy to begin with? And I think of, A Song of Ice and Fire, where George R. R. Martin, as I recall, I think he intended it for it to be one book originally. And then as he's writing, he's like, well, maybe it's 2 books. And then he was writing the second book. He's like, well, maybe it's 3. And then he just kept going. And he's like, yeah, it's going to be 7, at least for now. He could be longer. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think the last two, Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons, I think those two were actually part of the same book originally. And then he had to cut them in half. I think. I'm not sure. And I mean, Dance of Dragons is massive. Feast for Crows is kind of wordy, but not so much. Anyways, so I've been toying with the idea of small business and all that sort of thing. I do have a really fortunate reference point because no one in my family is writers or anything like that. But my dad had a small business for a long time, so he has a lot of experience with that. But what he doesn't have experience with is marketing. That was something that we didn't really do a lot of, and in fact, that was why we struggled for a while, is because we weren't getting new customers in, and so we were really hurting. And it took us a while to realize, oh, wait a minute, we need to do some marketing. And um, I can't remember exactly their game plan. I ended up doing a little bit of that where I was just like posting listings and writing the ads. Nothing to put on a resume, but maybe I will anyway, just to fluff myself up. But anyways, I do feel a little silly like talking about myself as an author when I haven't had anything published, and I haven't even finished my first manuscript. I've done a lot of writing. As I look back on it, because I was talking to people at FanX about it, and they're like, well, how long have you been writing? And I thought about it. I thought my first professional attempt was in like 2012, 2011, because I got out of high school and I started writing this book that I had hoped to finish. And I never did because it sucked. But I was thinking about that. I was like, I've been writing fairly consistently since then. There have been like long periods of downtime, but I thought about it. I'm like, that is like 7 years of experience, give or take. That's a lot of just writing. But the tricky thing, like I said, like writing is the easy part. Everything else is the hard part. And I learned a lot from that conference. People were saying, you have to have at least a website, preferably a blog. And we even kind of talked about it. in one seminar, the lady asked, she's like, "How many of you feel like blogs are on their way out? Like they're no longer relevant?" And I raised my hand. I said, "I think they are because people are more interested in Twitter or social media. They're interested in short form content that they can just breeze through while they're on their downtime. And so I've been kind of debating on starting a blog. I really don't want to because I don't see myself as much of a blogger. And I'd like to think that the stream could work well for something like that. But if I did that, I feel like I'd probably have to market differently. Anyways, that's me rambling. Basically, I feel like this stream has to change something. I guess the nice thing about it is that I could use it as sort of like an audio log, an audio blog, an alog. I don't know what you would call that. A podcast, I guess. And then like that was kind of the original idea, I think, was to just do readings on stream and then edit out the good ones. I need to make a point of that. I suppose it's never too late to restart. Tyler's calling it a light podcast. That's it's not too, I guess that's one way to call it. There is there's a website I've found called podbean.com, which is supposed to be like a um it's just like your own podcast hosting. And I don't follow podcasts, so I don't know what the standard is. I don't know if like me rambling like this is okay. Because I know that there's like nerd talk podcasts. Like I don't even remember what it's called. I'm sure somebody else would know because I'm sure it's like one of the more popular ones. But there's a podcast that specifically talks about Game of Thrones, like the TV show. And it's just all they do is like they'll watch the episode and then they'll get on and they'll record an episode and then push it out. There's barely any editing. There's no scripts. They just talk. So I mean, I don't really understand like the appeal behind uh I don't understand the appeal behind blogs or for that matter podcasts so much because I like information, but like I don't know, like if it's something personal, I don't see the appeal in it. Like if I walked into this stream, I'd probably be like, "This is stupid," and then just walk out. But evidently, people don't necessarily feel the same way, so that's tricky. Anyways, as far as marketing goes for that book, whenever it happens, um, I'm gonna need to start a Twitter. I'm gonna need to start tweeting. They recommended starting a website, which I really don't want to because you have to pay for it if you want like a half decent one. I guess I could try a cheap one, just be like one of those simple like free ones that they tell you to do for your e-portfolio, and then just upgrade it or just keep it simple. It's a lot to keep track of. Basically, everybody I asked on at Comic Con, they were telling me they're like, "Don't quit your day job." I was like, "Thanks," but like I said, like with my current job, I need to replace it. I'd like to think that if I get into a less stressful work environment, um, that I'll be better about all this. But I don't know about that because the reason I got into one of the reasons I got into cooking originally is because I was working the family business. It was a desk job. I was bored to tears every day. In retrospect, I would have done a little more. Like I would have done more reading or something. But I decided that I wanted something a little more proactive, a real job, quote unquote. Um, and so I started working in kitchens and realized that I hated it and quit doing that for a while. And now I'm back there. Um, But the thing was, I felt like I was gonna be better off having spending more energy, and I found out that I was actually like worse off in general spending that energy because I was so much more stressed out. My judgment was worse. My mood was gloomier, and not like a fun kind of gloomy, just like a wow, this guy's a dick kind of gloomy. But jeez Louise, I've added photos onto Google Maps, and I keep getting notifications that are like, "Wow, you're popular. Your photos have like 170,000 views." I'm like, "Thanks, I don't care. Unless you're paying me, don't bother me about this crap." I only bring that up because I like they give me notifications for it. I just had like I had one from earlier, and then they gave me a second one just now. So I had two of the same stupid notifications sitting right on top of each other. Thanks, Google. They're not even good photos. They're just things I take sporadically and post. But apparently people love seeing pictures of a half-eaten churro, so give the people what they want. Anyways, marketing is like a brave new world for me because if I'm gonna market, it's gonna be, a hard road. I feel like I know what to do. Tyler say thousands of likes on Instagram, 980 of them are sexy bots. I could go for a sexy bot right now. Especially 980 of them. Ugh. But like as far as marketing goes, I'd like to think that I know what I'm doing. But then again, I thought I knew what I was doing when I got into kitchen work. And as it turns out, I have no idea what I'm doing. Even a year into it, because I've been doing it for, I think all told, the amount of time I spent in kitchens has been, let me think. It was 8 weeks of culinary school, 3 weeks at Temple Square. Um, no, I guess it was 4 months. Did I say 3 weeks? 4 months. I meant 3 months, but it was actually closer to 4 months now that I think about it. So 8 weeks, that's 2 months ish. Since it was twice a week, I guess you could count it as uh, 1 month, since it was only less than half the week. So 1 month in culinary school, 4 months in Temple Square. I've gone over a year at the place I'm currently working. So yeah, I've spent almost a year and a half working in kitchens, and I've not gotten that much better at it. Like I'm still terrible at it. So obviously cooking's not for me. I just got to find another job. Marketing is brave new world for me. I like interacting with people, which I found from working in kitchens. So like the best part of that is like interacting with people and helping them out, which I didn't think would be what I would do. But my people skills have developed a lot, so that's nice. As far as the future goes, like I said, I'd like to think that I know what I'm doing when it comes to marketing. I think like I have somewhat of a game plan that I think would probably work. I know it, but I know it would cost money. Thankfully, I do have some squirreled away. But it's a daunting task. And I've honestly like I've been tempted to like because I go to a lot of people. I go to church with a lot of people that attend the business college here in Salt Lake, and I guess not here in Salt Lake since I'm actually in Davis County, but like I know people that go to business college, and so it's tempting for me to ask and be like, do you know anybody that's into marketing that's looking for a job in marketing, and then just pay them and be like, hey, help me develop a plan, help me do my marketing for me. But of course, that's even more money. And I do have I have a dad who's willing to help me out and who can give me some expertise on small businesses if that's the route I want to go. But he doesn't know a lot about marketing because that's just not his thing. He had thought about doing like accounting. Like he's retired now, but he's been thinking, he's like, I think I might try and become an accountant just for fun, like a retirement job. Because he's like, I like Excel and messing around with things and figuring it out. I was like, that'd be cool. I'd hire you on. So maybe I could have him as my CPA. Because apparently taxes are like the worst thing for a small business. In fact, he told me that the family business almost went under because of back taxes. They forgot to pay their taxes, forgot. And they ended up. I only found this out way after the fact, but he and my mom ended up having to take a second mortgage on the house and try and pay things off, and this whole disaster. And and I asked him, I was like, "Does that happen a lot?" He's like, "Yeah." Apparently, it happens all the time with small businesses because they don't know the laws, they forget to pay their taxes, or they don't want to, and then it comes back to bite them in the butt. So, I mean, you look at all the costs, and you're looking at, you gotta have a website, you've gotta do you've gotta, um, send out review copies. You've got to have an accountant to make sure you're doing all this stuff. So, like the idea of starting your own small business like that is enticing, but I'm almost convinced that that would take up more time than the writing itself, which kind of defeats the point. It's a tricky little road. I don't know if this is a normal thing, but in my family, like at least as far as my dad's side, we tend to be a jack of all trades, where we never quite settle on any one thing. My dad, he had the business that he had before he retired, but he was also a construction worker. He had that business going for him. He also had he was a snowplow on the weekends or in the mornings, whatever. Oh, what was the other one? Pest control. He did pest control for a long while, and he was a pilot in his spare time, flying for the Civil Air Patrol. And my grandpa was much the same way. He was a miner. He was a farmer. Apparently, when he and my grandma first got married, he was working like 3 or 4 jobs. And this is during the quote unquote golden time, when supposedly a person could make a nice living off of just one job. But he had a lot of different hobbies. He was a locksmith in his spare time. I don't know if he ever got paid for it, but he liked to do like keys and locks, and he did all the locks on our business, on the family business. He also, I didn't know this until after he had passed, unfortunately, but did he walk uphill to each job? Tyler's asking. Yes, yes, I believe he did. In the snow, both ways. Um, Taken. What was I gonna say? Oh yes. So I didn't know this until after he passed away. But I guess he was a programmer as well. Nothing like, I mean, he wasn't like a full-time programmer, but just like when, keep in mind, this is a guy that was, I don't know if he was old enough to serve in World War II, but he was close to that age range. Maybe not quite a baby boomer, but a little older. Anyways, he, when computers started to come around, he decided to learn how to use them, and he was like all amped up about it. Like it was his idea. He was really gung ho about it. And his business partner, who helped him with the family business didn't necessarily want to do that, but my grandpa was dead set on it. So he would build computers in his spare time, and he did a little bit of programming. Apparently, some of the code that he wrote is still used in like pest control, I think, which he worked with my dad. I guess like some of the old school operating systems still use a little bit of his code. That was what my dad said anyway. But my uncle, who married into the family, he's like the tech savvy guy. He's the guy everyone goes to when they have computer problems. As it turns out, because he has a college degree in computer science, and as it turns out, how he got into computers was my grandpa, his father-in-law, and which is like I thought it was the other way around, but no. And so like, and keep in mind, my grandpa was a farm boy growing up. It wasn't like he was, some scholar or some nerd. He just liked to work, and he liked to figure things out and keep himself busy. And I'm much the same way because, I'd like to sit here and pretend, oh, I'm a writer. I'm, some fancy pants big shot. But at the same time, I look at it and I look at all that stuff about like how some writers are like, yeah, I have like 9 books planned for the series. I know my buddy Jason's kind of like that. He hasn't written one book, but I've talked to him. He's like, yeah, I've got this idea and it's going to be like a whole trilogy. And I'm like, you should write the first book and then decide if it's going to be a trilogy. Anyways, but for me, like I look at this and I'm like, am I going to get bored of writing? Like, am I just going to get sick of it and put it off to the side? I'd like to think that I'd be more dedicated to it, but and I honestly like I envy a writer being able to pour out consistently and do a whole series. I would love to have like this epic fantasy saga and just like it's this big sweeping thing and it's got like 8 different books and they're all like surrounding different characters and events. I don't know if I'm capable of that, unfortunately. And so I kind of wonder about whether or not I'll be able to live up to that. And then I wonder about marketing and whether or not I can do that or whether I should just stick to writing and ugh. I hate thinking so far ahead because there's so much that can change and go wrong. There's just no point to it. Right now, what I should focus on is just hopefully, finishing the book that I'm writing. I've got a short story I've mentioned. I think I mentioned it to Tyler. I know I mentioned it to Kagan, who sometimes comes on stream when he's not a lameo. But I've got a short story that I was hoping to submit to the uh, Horror Writers Association. Um, because a lot of my earlier stories were very dark, and I feel like I kind of gravitate towards horror and dark fantasy. Not completely, but generally. And so one day, I'm hoping that I have a short story for them. It's kind of a horror one um, for their horror anthology. I think I mentioned it on stream. I finished the first draft of it. I've been going back over it, trying to decide, how to write it. I just want to like finish it because like normally I'm in this habit where I'm like, I only want to write stories that I feel are really good from the beginning. But at the same time, I feel like that's a bad habit to have because a good writer should be able to take something bad and make it good, as opposed to just taking something good and just making it. But of course, that's a lot harder than it sounds. Um, it the first draft, I felt like it turned out really well, even though it was like hard for me to write because it wasn't an idea that was as good as I was hoping. And then I've been looking back over it in the second draft. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. But so I'm hoping to finish that. I definitely want to finish it and submit it, even if I feel like it's not very good. And if that happens, um, that'll sort of be, I guess, a bit of a leg up in the as a writer, and I can say that I've actually had something that's gotten accepted. I don't know. They haven't talked about like submission because I saw them at Comic Con and at the League of Utah Writers, and they were talking about the well, they didn't say it was a contest. They said it was just an anthology. But if they accept it and they're actually discerning, I can, you know, consider that leverage into the writing community. But anyway, so I hope to finish that soon, even if it does suck, because I feel like part of writing, because it's, I've for a long time I've had a lot of short stories and I've kind of given up on them, and I'd like to be able to just like that's kind of my next goal is to be more persistent and to just expound on ideas, and because I find that your best ideas in general tend to surprise you. I've heard of a lot of like writers who wrote a story and they didn't think it'd be very good, and then that ended up being their most popular one, and they weren't expecting it at all. So I'd hopefully like to be able to do something like that. We'll see in the future, anyway. Um, During the summer, I don't know if I'll be able to, but I'm going to try finishing the book on writing. I'm on the third draft. It's about 160,000 words now. Um, I thought that the third draft would actually be easier because I'm not doing like a normally like I'll do the first draft and then the second draft is basically like a complete rewrite where the only thing I take is like the general ideas that I like rather than the writing itself. With this one though, the idea was just to go through it and see like and to fine tune it rather than redo it. And I thought that would be a lot faster. It turns out I feel like that's actually a lot slower. So we'll see how that goes. Um, but I'd like to finish. I'd like to get a microphone and maybe have a setup during the summer. I'd like to get another job, maybe one that's less stressful or gives me a little more time. Ideally, if I could get a job that allows me to do homework while I'm working, I don't know if that's possible, or at least not for just some community college student. But if I could get a job like that, I could, you know, I would have more time for writing, hopefully. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I would also, like to have an audio setup with a microphone and uh, some noise filters, and to just start doing, not even necessarily getting paid to do voice stuff, but just to be able to do voice stuff for the stream and to build like a sort of portfolio for that. I'd like to be able to do that as well. Ideally, I would really like to be able to do freelance jobs in general, like Uber or DoorDash or whatever. Um, I suppose I could start doing DoorDash. Um, I mean, it's not the most dignified thing in the world, but if I can just make, I don't know how much money you make off of it. I guess it just depends, but and it's so saturated, but we'll see. Jeez, I must be getting tired because I'm losing my train of thought here. But I'd like to figure out my setup for audio stuff. Basically, I just like to have things figured out. Especially now that I'm not doing homework, I feel like I could do more writing in general, figure things out. But we'll see. It's an uphill battle, looking at everything. I'd like to think that as a writer, I'm good enough that I'm better than everyone else, which sounds kind of silly saying it out loud. But with a lot of writers that are like small time, it's easy to think of yourself as being uh, better than them. I don't know if that's true though, because I haven't read any of their stuff. Do I have to be inspired? I would like to be, but of course, part of me finishing that short story is trying to be a good writer without necessarily being inspired, but to be a good writer on my own volition. There's a video I have saved onto that playlist I mentioned earlier called It's a TED Talk by the lady that wrote Eat, Pray, Love. It's a TED Talk called Your Elusive Creative Genius. It's a really good video. The woman, you wouldn't necessarily think that the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love would be, insightful. You'd think she'd just be like a mommy blogger that made it big. But honestly, no. I think based on what I've seen on her TED Talk, she is incredibly smart and really insightful. And so much so that I'm actually thinking at some point I'd like to read her book. But anyways, and she talks about how the success of Eat, Pray, Love has been daunting to her because she's like, I don't know if I'm ever going to write another book that successful. And that scares me, she says. But she talks about inspiration and how, like, we tend to think of inspiration as an outside force. But she says, but that's not necessarily true. We have control over that. That's us. That's us doing the writing. That's us painting the picture. That's us dancing to the music. And so we need to be able to get back that inspiration and use it for ourselves at our command, at our beck and call. So I'd like to be able to do that. In fact, I think it was Jim Butcher. Maybe I'll save this video as well. Jim Butcher's a science fiction fantasy author. I think primarily fantasy. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was someone else. But he talked about how he came up with the idea for one of his best-selling stories. What it was is he got into an argument on an internet forum between like aspiring writers, and the other guy was insisting. He's like, you have to have a good idea. Otherwise, you'll never make it work. And Jim Butcher disagreed. He's like, no, you can make a bad idea work. And he's like, and so the other guy challenged him. He said, I bet you, if I give you a bad idea, you will not be able to make it work. And he says, I'll do you one better. You give me 2 bad ideas and I will make it work. And so, he took those 2 bad ideas and he ended up making his, making his best-selling series. Tyler's asking what Elizabeth Gilbert means by outside force. She explains it a little better on hers in more detail. But basically, what it was is, oh dang, I guess that video is not available for some reason. That's dumb. Anyways, basically the word genius doesn't actually mean smart person. It actually refers to, it's a Latin word. It refers to a sort of supernatural being that gives people inspiration. The Greeks called it a daemon. The Romans called it a a genius. Some people call it a muse. But basically throughout the history of art all over the world, people felt like the greatest artwork did not come from people, it came from inspiration, like from this outside force, that it was so much bigger and better than themselves. And a genius was like that. Like it wasn't you, it was basically like this divine being, like an angel or a demon, that was giving you ideas. And it was so much better than you. And it was usually the artists who were saying that they felt like it was their inspiration coming to them rather than them creating something, that they were being blessed or whatever you want to say. And so Elizabeth Gilbert talked about, and how she said that as people became more, enlightened, they became less superstitious. They started to believe that that wasn't necessarily true. Um, Instead, they just refer to the person as the genius. You are the inspiration. You're the artist. You're the leader. And so the point of the talk is that even though people and artists still feel like when they do something really good, they feel like it was better than they could have done on their own, that it was an outside inspiration helping them. And she's saying that, do your best, do a little better. Because it's not necessarily an outside force. It's not necessarily a genius, not some daemon that's helping you, not some muse. It is you, the artist. You are that talented. You are that good. So go do something. That's basically what she's saying. She explains it more in detail. It's a really interesting talk. But essentially, I'm trying to take that message to heart because I'd like to. I feel like the book that I'm writing was inspired. Like I feel like it is better than. Uh, I'm religious. I don't necessarily believe that God necessarily is helping me with this book because it's very dark and grim, and I'm like, ugh. But I do feel like something bigger than myself is happening. But but for me, like I look at that and I'm like, if that's true, then this first book that I'm trying to get published is gonna be basically my last, because no one else, like none of my other books are necessarily gonna be as good as this one, if that's true. And so for me, I'm like, I gotta try. I gotta do a little more. I gotta have something to build on. This is very presumptuous of me, of course. I try to have confidence in my writing, but it all depends on other people. But essentially, like people, when they look at inspiration and talent, it's always an outside force. Not always, but generally, because you'll have people that are like, they'll look at uh, they'll look at this amazing painter and they're like, oh, I'll never be that good. And then they're like, oh, I'll never be that talented. And the reality is like, well, you could be if you just practice, because that's really the big difference. Talent is cheap. But so for me, like for a while, I was in that trap where I was like, no, I need to write something that inspires me, or that I feel inspired to write. I don't want to write something unless I'm sure it's good. That's a mistake. You should be writing. You should, like, if you want to write, you should be writing, even when you feel like your writing sucks, even when you're not so confident about it. So that's what I'm trying to do more of. I went back to school. I went to get my English degree. Um, And I've had a lot of people like, I know that an English degree is kind of like the butt of people's jokes. Like they're like, "Oh, you have an English degree. Well, I hope you like working at Starbucks for the rest of your life." And I'd like to think I'm better than that. I mean, we all like to think we're special, right? We all like to think we're exceptional. But, you know, it is true that uh, people generally feel like even if you have like a good degree, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you a good job. And it certainly doesn't necessarily guarantee you a job in your field of work. And on top of that, I'm getting an English degree, which is ostensibly an art. It's a liberal arts degree. That's literally what it is, even if it is a bachelor's. So I'm taking this huge step forward, and I feel like it was the right move going back to school. But at the same time, like it's just so uncertain that I freak myself out when I think about it. But because the thing is, like, I didn't choose English because I wanted to be a liberal arts major. I chose English because I'm good at English. I'm good at like proofreading and grammar and all this other stuff. And I'm a very discerning reader where I'm like, even before like, because they taught this in writing 1010 when I took it 7 years ago. They they were like, whenever you watch a movie or whenever you read a book, don't just read it. Try and pick it apart and understand its ingredients and how it works together. And even at the time, I was like, I already know this. I'm already in the habit of doing that. So I've been doing that for a while. And so I'd like to think that that is a useful skill for an editor to have. But is that going to translate to me being able to make a living? Well, I mean, who the heck knows, right? Let the morrow give thought for the things of itself. But it is daunting because, like, I don't know. I feel a little embarrassed, honestly, getting an English degree because I feel like I should be getting something that's a little more practical, quote unquote. But at the same time, I'm not good at like STEM. I've tried programming a little bit, terrible at it. I can't do it. And I'm not that good at math to begin with. Like, programming just goes way over my head. Even stuff that I like I enjoy medical science, and I had thought about joining the American Medical Writers Association because I was talking to Dr. O'Donnell, who I interviewed for that assignment, and she's a part of AMWA, and she says that like the writers and editors there make like 600 grand a year minimum. 600 grand for writing, but you've got to have a degree. Like you can't just, and not just like a bachelor's. And not just like a bachelor's of English. You have to be like a doctor, at the very least. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, geez, Louise. Like it was honestly tempting because it's like, well, that would secure my future, definitely. I'd be making bank, but at the same time, that's I'm imagining you would at least have to have a medical degree. And granted, you wouldn't have to necessarily intern as a you know a doctor or a nurse or whatever, but you would have to have your medical degree. You'd probably have to, you'd have to have your thesis at least. And like I said, I find medical science fascinating, so I'm like, maybe I could do that. But then as I thought about it, I was like, no, because I cannot do science. Like I'm just mentally incapable of science, which I'm sure, given the fact that I'm religious, makes people snicker that those two things happen to be personality traits of mine. But I just cannot do it. it goes beyond me. And I can kind of understand. Oh, maybe I could learn. Oh, fibrosis or whatever it is. Cysto meaning this and fibrosis meaning that. But I don't think I have it in me to do medical writing, which is a shame. So I look at it and I'm like, ugh, the only thing I think I'm good at is writing. At least immediately. Maybe something else will come up in the future, but writing and editing and maybe marketing, I don't know. But so like I said, I'd like to think that I'm a better writer than a lot of people. I don't know if that's true. I'd like to think that. I don't know if that's true. But of course, the stupid thing is that even if you're a better writer, it doesn't guarantee you they're going to be sold. Because like you look at somebody like Stephen King. Stephen King's not a bad writer, but there are better writers out there. And even Stephen King himself, like he said it outright. He says, "I'm the McDonald's of writing." He's like, "I am cheap and simple. Like I'm not some 5-course meal, not some fancy French chef. I'm McDonald's." That's what he said. But the thing about that is that McDonald's sells. It's the number one food chain, fast food chain or whatever. If I'm going to be a writer, I don't see myself being McDonald's. So I look at that and I'm like, does that mean that I'm not going to make a lot of money? Because it might be, it might be good, but if it's like say that it's a smart book, not necessarily that it is, but say that it was, if I were to write a smart book, are the people that read books, that spend a lot of money reading books, are they going to care how smart my book is? If that's the case. So the only smart move I can see is to write for myself. And that's what I'm doing. This book, like I like the story, I like the setting, I like writing it, and I'm kind of addicted to it, like this particular story, which I think is a great sign. And I think about it a lot. Like I'll surprise myself, like I'll just be kind of like I'll have a wayward thought that's like, "Oh, what about this and this in my book?" And then like I'll just kind of start going on, which is a great sign, I think. But it doesn't guarantee me success. And if writing doesn't work out for me, if I can't make a living editing and writing, I don't know what the F I'm going to do, to be honest with you. Probably just cry and then, cry. And then I'll start doing Uber or something. Apparently, George R. R. Martin, apparently his first book that got published was really well received critically, but it didn't sell very well. And apparently he almost gave up on writing entirely. It went into real estate. Can you imagine that? The guy who's basically considered the next Tolkien going into real estate instead of writing. Ugh. Maybe that's what I should do is go into real estate. Just do writing on the side. Because that's what everyone says. Don't quit your day job. Don't quit your day job. And I'm sure that holds true no matter how good of a writer you are. It's scary, man. It really is. But there's no point in worrying about it, I suppose. I honestly didn't expect to go on a spiel for that long because that was like an hour's worth of a spiel, and I bet I could keep going if I really wanted to. Writing is basically my last resort, I think. But who knows? Maybe it'll all work out. Maybe I'll be the next big thing, and I can make money. I shouldn't think about this when I'm tired like this because I get really emotional when I'm tired, which is honestly like it's kind of good for writing because I can really just pour my soul out or channel that energy. But I don't usually write on Sundays, not after the stream especially. Anyways, I think I'm going to call it quits for tonight because I've been rambling for a long time. Whoops, kind of tired as usual. Unfortunately, Kimmery didn't come on to the stream. Uh, Shelby, of course, wasn't able to come on, which is fine. But uh, thank you for your encouragement, Tyler, and your support. I really do appreciate it. Um, yeah. What else is there to say, really? Hopefully, with the summer and with whatever job hopefully I do get another job, and hopefully I have more time to write, even during the incoming school year. Certainly during the summer school, it's a creative writing class, so I should be able to breeze right through it. But hopefully, and who knows, maybe I'll learn something new that I'll be able to use, or maybe I'll form some new connection. But in any case, we'll just keep on, I guess. I didn't read any more of that Agatha Christie novel this week because, well, the people that wanted me to read it are not on stream. Tyler's saying it's all about networking. Yeah, and thankfully I am in Utah. There's a lot of fiction writers here, and it's the age of information. I got a lot of people I can reach out to. Hopefully, with whatever new job I get, even if I can't do my homework, I'd like to be able to have enough downtime that I can do more reading. Like just sit around and read a book or something. That would be awesome. Or maybe even do some writing. I do writing in my on my lunch break, which is a lot of fun. Nothing substantial, at least not yet, but it's always nice to write. Anyways, thanks for coming on the stream, Tyler. Um, you're a good friend. You know, you're very supportive. I appreciate that a lot. Um, I'm gonna go and cry myself to sleep. If you need me, you know where to find me. Have a good night.